This video is about my experience with drug abuse and cannabis, and if you haven't seen the previous videos in this series I'm doing, they provide some important context to where I was at when I first started using cannabis, which was while I was still in school. A torrid time for me, and like most people, I turned to drugs as an escape. I couldn't deal with what was going on, and there was some sort of substance available that could take me away from that for a moment, and that's how I got started from a bad place. My problem, I think, really actually started when school finished, and then I decided to go back to sixth form. Now, here in the UK at the time, you had a choice to go to college, which would have been a new place, and a fresh start was probably what I really needed. But I went back to the same place, which kind of kept all of the negativity I'd experienced around there very close to me while I was starting to experiment and use drugs. This essentially set me on a path to not really get past what had happened and not deal with all of the things. I was kind of locked into the same place, the same location physically, and I was just using drugs to escape the feeling. And it started out seemingly fairly harmless, and it got serious and worse with time. So to give you a little bit of context of around the time I'm talking about, this was when I was past the incidents of self-harm and suicide, and this was when I was briefly radicalized as well, which was the first video I made in this series. So it started with one of the lighter, air quotes, forms of cannabis, which is known as hash. This isn't as psychoactive and the high isn't as strong, but the quality of hash is pretty disgusting. Some of the stuff we used to get would be cut with car oil and plastic and all sorts of other stuff put into the drugs to bulk them up and, essentially get more bang for the buck from who's producing it. This is one of the problems with illegal drugs, is that because they're not controlled, the substance you're getting can come in a whole variety of different qualities. And this is even true of cannabis, which is often said it's just a plant, which is true. It is just a plant. It can be grown in many different ways, and it can also be cut with different things as well. So after I finished my time at sixth form, I eventually managed to find a job. And somewhere around this time, we had been introduced to what was known as super skunk. This is when you are smoking the bud of the plant as opposed to the hash, which is ground down leaves that have been stored for a certain amount of time, so they change color and it creates this sort of thick brown substance. And this is really where I think things started to go downhill without me realizing it, because I was introduced to a much stronger and more potent form of cannabis, and I now had lots of disposable cash. And looking back on it, I spent probably about 80% of my money on cannabis without really realizing it. It was just what I did. I wanted to get high all the time. I wasn't dealing with the traumas I've been through in my past, and this would just set me basically on a downward spiral. So the story will continue, but I kind of want to take this point right here to talk about cannabis in terms of the debate around it, as I have been once pro and now are mostly against the use of cannabis. And I've also spent a lot of time taking in information from both sides, giving me what I think is a relatively informed perspective. And through my own experiences, there are 2 points that I think are really important that need to be said around this drug, and possibly of drugs in general, but certainly with cannabis there are different types. It may just be a plant, but there are different potencies, different quality, and like I already mentioned, things can be cut with other elements as well. Now there are 2 key components of cannabis: CBD, which contributes to the calming and relaxing feel that can come from getting high, and then there is THC, which is the psychotropic or psychoactive side of things. The second point to take in here is that there are different types of people. You can respond very differently from maybe a friend or just someone else in general. Our brains are set up and primed to deal with certain experiences in different ways. And for me, I was primed to have a very bad experience from the beginning, I believe, because I was using it to try and deal with trauma and difficulties that I've been through. And what they ended up doing is reinforcing and making those difficulties feel even realer, even though they were in the past. So I was in a bad mental state, but as well as this, the quality of the drugs we were getting were very poor, and we kind of knew this at the time as well. When one of our dealers informed us that the stuff we were getting was sprayed with glass. Now, this is a process to make the drug seem to be heavier so that when you weigh it up and buy it, that spraying of the glass has then allowed the dealer to make a little bit more money. But what the glass was also supposed to do was cut up your lungs and your throat while you were smoking this so that you would get a more potent high as the cannabis and the components of it would make its way into your bloodstream easier by having these micro cuts. And it sounds so horrendous, and I don't know how true it actually was, but since we were told that, we could always kind of see there was this other substance on top of the what was called super skunk. And over here, if you don't know about super skunk, it is grown to be as potent as possible in the THC element and not so much in the CBD. Now, usually what happens is the CBD kind of cancels out the THC effect. So we were getting some towards the psychoactive end of the spectrum stuff. And my consumption of this stuff was daily, spent most of the day smoking it, and that went on for weeks and months and actually years, just constantly every day for years. And that can really do damage to your mind, which it did to mine. And I'll talk about how I managed to undo some of that damage in another video. And I'll also mention there's actually a really good documentary on YouTube. If you look up something along the lines of anxiety and schizophrenia associated with skunk over here in the UK, there is actually like a whole youth work system around trying to reach out to people that are having negative mental experiences using this drug, which is exactly what I was having, and I didn't find out about this until I was off it for many years. So going back to the story, into my years of employment, spending a lot of my money on these drugs, using things like bongs, and really kind of taking me to some dark places. I certainly had some nasty experiences from getting high with skunk, and eventually it ended up really getting the better of me. I had a lot of anxiety and unrest inside of myself that I kind of just thought was the world around me. I had a negative view of the world. I had negative experiences in my past, and I thought that that was that, and that was all it would be. And I never really saw that the drugs were enhancing and making it worse. I always thought I was escaping all of that through the use of these drugs. And eventually I got to a point where it was becoming physically exhausting, mentally exhausting, and I found myself one time with all of my friends and just not being able to participate at all. I physically couldn't do it. I couldn't participate, and that was kind of new when I knew that I basically had to give this up. And of course, it can be addictive as well. I believe the substance isn't addictive. It's actually just me perhaps most likely having an addictive personality. Today, maybe I'm addicted to being productive, playing Minecraft and making Minecraft videos. I'm addicted to health and fitness and working out and running and things like that. I had to take that energy and put it into a different place. So I've just done a little math and realized that it's well over 10 years ago now, which is quite incredible. And things got a little bit awkward for me after that in some other ways that I'll talk about in the next video that I plan on making. Now, when it comes to drug use, I am not really for or against. I don't think it's right to tell other people what to do to some extent, but I am certainly against people using drugs to deal with emotional problems. I think in that context, drugs can't really be good for anyone because they don't address the core issues. So if you are someone who you have negativity in your life and you feel like the drugs, whatever it is that you consume, is a relief for you, that is a problem that can never solve itself. I believe that can only ever get worse. I can't really speak to people who do it casually and enjoy it and perhaps have no negative experiences whatsoever, and it's a healthy relationship that they have, because I wouldn't want to say that in the fears of encouraging someone who might think that is their situation, but actually it's not, which was pretty much what I was doing for many years. I thought this was the answer, the relief, and it turns out it was just making everything worse. So I had been through a lot of trauma in my youth, and in my early adult years and late teens, I essentially just reinforced all of that deep into my mental state with the abuse of these drugs, and it caused a lot of paranoia, anxiety, unrest and uneasiness, always on edge, panic attacks, and all sorts. If you sound like you have any of these things and you smoke cannabis, the two are most likely linked together. Now, if I could say anything positive about the experience, it's along the tone of count your blessings. If I look at where I'm at now, I might not have got here for all the bad things that I've been through. And one strange thing that I think back to is the other drugs that I experimented with, and how that I always thought that marijuana was alright, it's a plant, it's not that serious, it's not so big deal, and that train of thought may have actually kept me back from using harder drugs, which could have gotten even worse for me. So that is no endorsement of marijuana in any way, just a strange caveat on the experience that I went through. Perhaps if it wasn't for that line of thinking, I might have ended up on harder substances and never got to where I am today. So I think I've gotten a lot of this off my chest for now, and there's a couple more videos to come on these topics as well. But this is where we're going to wrap this one up. I thank you for your time, thank you for listening to me, and I'll see you soon in another one. Bye bye.